The lecture hall stretched before me like the belly of some great vessel, curved walls humming with the soft blue glow of knowledge transfer systems. I stood at my position near the back, my three-fingered hands resting on the smooth surface of my desk, watching as Commander Vrell strutted to the center platform with all the confidence of someone who had never been proven wrong. Not yet, anyway. "Cadets!" His voice boomed through the chamber, those ridiculous mandibles clicking with each syllable. "Today we examine the greatest fallacy in galactic history, the myth of Earth." A ripple of amusement passed through the assembled students, 73 beings from 42 different worlds, and not one of them human. That was intentional, of course. The Galactic Military Academy on Station Kepler 9 prided itself on diversity, but humans? They were still considered too primitive for officer training. Vrell's primary eyes gleamed as he activated the holo display. An image of Earth materialized above us, spinning slowly, all blue and green and utterly unremarkable. "This," he gestured with one of his forearms, "is what the humans call a Deathworld. Category 9 on the hazard scale. They would have you believe this makes them formidable." I watched as Kenna, the Threxian sitting 2 rows ahead, let out a wheezing laugh. Her translator rendered it as something between amusement and disbelief. "Deathworld," Vrell continued, pacing now, his footfalls echoing in the sudden silence. "A designation they wear like a badge of honor. They speak of their gravity, their weather, their predators. They tell stories of surviving conditions that would kill most civilized species within hours." He paused for effect, turning to face us directly. "They are, without question, the most self-aggrandizing species I have encountered in 30 cycles of service." More laughter now. Even I felt my throat sac inflate slightly with what might have been agreement. The humans had a reputation, after all. Every species knew someone who had worked with a human. The stories were always the same. Reckless, emotional, prone to attacking problems with brute force rather than intelligence. "Let me tell you what I witnessed," Vrell said, his tone shifting to something more personal. 3 solar months ago, I had the displeasure of commanding a joint operation with a human vessel. The mission was simple: retrieve data from an abandoned research station in the Keller system. Standard procedure called for careful approach, systematic scanning, methodical extraction. He let the silence stretch. "The humans arrived first. Do you know what they did?" He looked around the room, making eye contact with various cadets. "They simply went in. No extended scans, no safety protocols beyond basic environment suits. Their captain told me, and I quote, 'Looks fine to me, Commander. We'll have this wrapped up before lunch.'" The entire hall erupted in disbelief. I heard Gorvin, the massive Keltharian behind me, grunt something that his translator helpfully rendered as "suicidal idiots." "Indeed," Vrell agreed. The station was structurally compromised. Radiation levels were elevated in 3 sectors. The life support systems had been offline for 6 standard years. By all reasonable calculation, the mission should have taken 4 days of careful work. "How long did it take the humans?" someone called out. Vrell's mandibles clicked rapidly. 17 hours. They simply did it. Ignored every safety recommendation. Walked through areas that should have required full hazard suits in their basic field gear. When I questioned their chief engineer about the radiation exposure, "Do you know what she said?" He didn't wait for an answer. "Oh, that? Yeah, we'll probably want to get checked out when we're done, but it's not that bad." Not that bad. The exposure levels would have rendered most species sterile for 2 generations. I found myself sharing a look with Tamora, the quiet selenite who occupied the desk beside mine. Her expression was difficult to read, given that her species communicated primarily through pheromones, but her body language suggested skepticism. "This is the problem with Deathworlders," Vrell pressed on. "They have no concept of reasonable caution. They survived their planet's horrors through sheer stubborn refusal to die, and they mistake this for actual competence. The lecture continued in this vein for another 20 minutes. Vrell outlined incident after incident, painting a picture of humans as dangerous, unpredictable loose cannons who succeeded through luck rather than skill. He showed statistics, human casualty rates in military operations, percentages of successful missions, comparisons with other species. On paper, the numbers supported his argument. Humans died more frequently than any other spacefaring species. They took more risks. They suffered more injuries. They are, Vrell concluded, a species that will, inevitably, self-destruct. The galaxy would be wise to minimize contact until such time as they either evolve beyond their savage nature or remove themselves from the equation entirely. The silence that followed was heavy with agreement. Even Tamora seemed convinced. Her bioluminescent patches pulsing in what I had learned meant acceptance of stated facts. That's when the door opened. The sound was subtle, barely audible over the ambient hum of the station's systems, but everyone noticed. You couldn't help but notice. She was short. That was my first thought. Barely 5.5 feet tall, which put her well below average for most species in the room. Her hair was pulled back in some kind of practical arrangement, dark and unremarkable. She wore the standard gray uniform of a station worker, the kind of outfit that marked her as support staff rather than military. Human. Definitely human. Commander Vrell? Her voice carried clearly, despite its lack of volume. I'm sorry to interrupt. There's a message from Station Command regarding the coolant leak in Sector 7. Vrell's entire posture changed. His shoulders pulled back, his mandibles snapped shut, and his primary eyes fixed on her with what could only be described as contempt. This is a closed session, technician. Martinez, she supplied. Emily Martinez. And yes, sir, I know, but command said it was urgent and you weren't responding to comms. The emphasis on that last part was subtle but unmistakable. Around me, I heard several cadets make small sounds of suppressed amusement. A commander not responding to communications was, well, it was a breach of protocol at minimum. Vrell's skin shifted to a darker shade of purple. I was conducting a lecture. Yes, sir. About humans, from what I heard. Emily Martinez stood there, one hand holding a data pad, completely relaxed. No fear. No deference beyond the basic minimum required by rank difference. Sounds like it was pretty thorough. It was factual, Vrell said stiffly, based on extensive field experience. Oh, I'm sure. She smiled then, and something about that smile made my throat sac tighten. It wasn't hostile, exactly. It was worse. It was knowing. The Keller Station retrieval, right? I read the report. Fascinating stuff. Vrell's mandibles began clicking rapidly. Then you understand the points I was making. I understand you made points, Emily agreed. She glanced around the room, making brief eye contact with several cadets. When her eyes passed over me, I felt an odd sensation, like being evaluated and categorized in a fraction of a second. Mind if I stay for the rest? I promise I'll be quiet. I just think it's important to hear all perspectives. Every instinct I possessed said this was a bad idea. Vrell clearly thought so too, based on the way his secondary eyes began tracking her movements while his primary eyes stayed locked on her face. This is an advanced, tactical course for officer candidates, he said slowly. It covers complex strategic concepts that require years of preliminary education to understand. Emily nodded. Sure. I'm just a technician. Fixing coolant leaks and calibrating sensors. Nothing complex. She moved to an empty spot along the wall, leaning against it casually. Don't mind me. Vrell stood there for a long moment, clearly calculating his options. He could order her out, but that might look petty, especially given that she had legitimate station business. He could end the lecture, but that would suggest she had somehow intimidated him. Or he could continue, treating her presence as irrelevant. He chose option 3. Very well, he said coldly. As I was saying, the human approach to problem-solving is fundamentally flawed. They rely on what they call intuition, or gut feeling, rather than proper analysis. Quick question, Emily said. Everyone froze. I said I would be quiet, she continued. But I'm curious about something. That Keller Station mission? How many casualties did your joint operation suffer? Vrell's mandibles stopped moving. That is not relevant to the broader point. 0, right? Emily pushed off from the wall slightly. I'm not challenging you, Commander. I just want to make sure I remember the report correctly. 0 casualties. Mission completed in 17 hours instead of the projected 4 days. All data retrieved intact. The risks taken were unacceptable, Vrell stated flatly. But the results were acceptable? Results achieved through recklessness are not praiseworthy. Emily tilted her head. So, if I understand correctly, you're saying that a successful mission with no casualties is still a failure if the people conducting it didn't follow your preferred methodology? The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Several cadets shifted uncomfortably. This was escalating beyond simple disagreement into something that felt dangerous. I am saying, Vrell enunciated each word carefully. That process matters. Discipline matters. Structure matters. The humans succeeded despite their methods, not because of them. Despite, Emily repeated softly. Interesting word choice. She pulled out her data pad, tapping at it with one finger. Commander, how many joint operations have you commanded with non-human crews? My service record is not under discussion, technician. Humor me. Roughly? Vrell's skin was now approaching deep violet. 47. And casualties across those missions? Acceptable levels given the nature of the operations. Could you define acceptable? Emily's tone remained conversational, almost friendly. Percentage-wise? Between 3 and 8%, depending on mission parameters. The Keller mission would have fallen into which category? 5% expected casualty rate. Emily nodded slowly. So you expected to lose, what, 2 crew members out of your combined force of 40? Expectations are, based on statistical analysis and historical precedent. Right. Historical precedent. She looked around the room again. Show of hands. How many of you have actually worked with humans before? Silence. Not one hand raised, including mine. Interesting, Emily said. So, we're learning about human tactical failures from someone who has worked with humans once, in a room full of people who have never worked with humans at all. I have encountered humans on multiple occasions, Vrell protested. Encountered, not worked with, not fought alongside. Encountered. Emily set her data pad down on the nearest desk. You mentioned statistics earlier, human casualty rates in military operations. Did you break those down by role? Role is irrelevant to the discussion. Is it, though? Emily stepped forward slightly. Because here's the thing about humans. We don't just serve in safe positions. We're not hanging back running sensors and coordinating logistics, though some of us do that, too. When there's a boarding action, who goes first? When there's a hull breach and someone needs to do a spacewalk in a debris field, who volunteers? When a ship is going down and crew need evacuation, who stays behind to make sure everyone else gets off? She paused, and in that pause, I heard my own breathing, loud in my ears. We do, Emily said simply. Humans do. Every single time. So yeah, our casualty rates are higher. Because we're doing the jobs that get you killed. Vrell's entire body had gone rigid. That is merely another example of your species' lack of self-preservation instinct. Maybe, Emily agreed. Or maybe it's an understanding that sometimes the mission matters more than the individual. Maybe it's recognizing that if someone has to take the risk, Better it be someone from a high gravity, high radiation, high everything death world, who has a better chance of surviving than someone from. She gestured vaguely at the room, pretty much anywhere else. You're suggesting human biology makes you superior, Vrell said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. No, Emily said firmly. I'm suggesting human biology makes us useful in specific situations. Just like selenite pheromone communication makes them ideal for negotiation roles. Just like Threxian spatial awareness makes them excellent pilots. Just like Keltharian strength makes them perfect for heavy equipment operations. She walked slowly toward the center platform, though she stopped well short of where Vrell stood. Every species has advantages, Commander. Every species has evolved to survive their particular environment. You want to talk about death worlds? Fine. Earth is one. We don't pretend otherwise. But that's not a badge of honor, and it's not a mark of savagery. Her voice had changed somehow. Still quiet, still conversational, but with something underneath it that made every one of my survival instincts scream. It's just a fact. Like the fact that you need atmospheric controls to survive in environments we find comfortable. Like the fact that gravity on Earth would literally crush most species in this room within hours. Like the fact that our immune systems treat biological agents as mild inconveniences that would hospitalize you for weeks. She stopped walking. You asked earlier about intuition? About gut feeling? You're right that we rely on it. You know why? Emily looked directly at Vrell. Because when you grow up on a planet where everything is trying to kill you, you develop really good pattern recognition really fast. The humans who couldn't read situations quickly, who couldn't assess threats on incomplete information, who couldn't make split-second decisions, they died. They died before they could have children. For millions of years. The silence was absolute now. Even the station's ambient systems seemed to have gone quiet. So, when we walk into a situation and our instincts tell us something is wrong, we've learned to listen. When we assess a problem and decide the fastest solution is the best solution, it's not recklessness. It's millions of years of evolutionary pressure teaching us that hesitation kills you just as dead as action does. This is exactly the problem, Vrell managed. His voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. You trust emotion over logic. No, Emily corrected gently. We trust experience. Pattern recognition isn't emotion, Commander. It's processing vast amounts of subconscious data faster than conscious thought can manage. Your species does it too. Every species does. We're just more aware of it, because ours got honed on a world where being wrong meant death. She picked up her data pad again. You wanted to teach these cadets about human tactical failures? That's fine. That's good, even. But if you're going to teach them about our failures, maybe also teach them why we're still here, despite those failures. Maybe mention that humans have been spacefaring for less than 200 years, and we're already integrated into galactic civilization at every level. Maybe note that in every major conflict since first contact, humans have fought and bled and died alongside every species in this room. She started toward the door, then stopped. Oh, and Commander? That coolant leak in Sector 7? It's in the wall adjacent to this lecture hall. Station Command estimates you have about 40 minutes before the temperature in here drops below survivable levels for most species present. She glanced at her pad. 38 minutes now. But hey, I'm sure if we follow proper protocol, systematic scanning, and methodical approach, we'll have it fixed in the projected 4-day timeline. Hope everyone brought warm clothes. Emily pulled open the door, paused, and looked back one final time. Or, I could fix it in the next 20 minutes, using human recklessness and gut feeling. Your call, Commander. The door closed behind her with a soft hiss. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Somewhere in the station's walls, I heard the distant sound of coolant dripping, each drop like a countdown timer. Vrell stood frozen on his platform, his skin cycling through colors I had never seen before. Finally, Tamora raised one delicate hand. "Commander," she said quietly, her translator rendering her pheromones into words. "Permission to assist Technician Martinez with repairs?" Vrell's mandibles clicked once. "Granted," he whispered. Half the class stood and followed Tamora out the door. I was one of them. The corridor outside smelled like recycled air, and something sharp, chemical, probably the coolant leak Emily Martinez had mentioned. I followed Tamora and the others, my heart's beating an irregular pattern against my ribcage. Behind us, I heard Vrell dismiss the remaining cadets, his voice stripped of its earlier authority. Emily was already 3 intersections ahead, moving with the kind of efficiency that suggested she knew every centimeter of this station. She hadn't looked back once. "Technician Martinez!" Tamora called out, her bioluminescent patches flashing a respectful yellow. "We would like to help." Emily stopped, turned. Her expression was unreadable. "You're officer candidates," she said slowly. "This is maintenance work." "We are students," Tamora replied. "And right now, you are the teacher." Something shifted in Emily's face. Not quite a smile, but close. She looked at each of us, one by one. 15 cadets, from a dozen different worlds, all watching her with varying degrees of curiosity and shame. "All right," she said finally. "First lesson about humans. We don't actually like doing everything alone. We just end up that way because everyone else is too busy following procedure to get their hands dirty." She started walking again, faster now, and we hurried to keep up. "Gorvin," she called back without looking. "You're Keltharian, right? Strong. Species?" The massive cadet lumbered forward. "Yes, technician." "Good. I'm going to need someone who can manually seal a pressure valve. It's stuck in the open position, and the servo controls are fried. Can you handle sustained output of about 2,000 pounds of force for approximately 90 seconds? Gorvin's translator rendered his response as somewhere between insulted and amused. "That is barely a warm-up." "Perfect." Emily tapped her pad. "Tamora, your species processes chemical information through scent, correct?" "Through pheromone analysis, yes." "Close enough. I need you to sniff around the main junction box in Sector 7 Delta. Something's been deteriorating in there for weeks, but the sensors can't pinpoint it. Maybe you can identify what's breaking down before it becomes critical." Tamora's patches shifted to an interested green. "I can attempt this." Emily continued assigning tasks as we walked, somehow knowing exactly what each species could contribute. Kenna's Threxian spatial awareness made her ideal for navigating the cramped access tunnels. A Vortelian named Prex had electromagnetic sensitivity that could detect power fluctuations. Even my own species' ability to function in low-oxygen environments became useful when Emily mentioned we might need to vent certain sections. Within minutes, we weren't cadets following a technician. We were a team. The damage was worse than I expected. The coolant had eaten through 3 layers of shielding, leaving behind a crystallized residue that crumbled at the slightest touch. The temperature had already dropped 5 degrees station-wide. "Here's the thing nobody tells you about space stations," Emily said, pulling open an access panel with practiced ease. "They're basically carefully controlled disasters waiting to happen. Every system depends on every other system. One failure cascades, so when something breaks, you don't have time for the proper 40-step diagnostic sequence." She handed Gorvin a massive wrench. "You need to improvise, adapt. Make do with what you have and who you have." "This is what Commander Vrell would call reckless," I heard myself say. Emily glanced at me. "What's your name, cadet?" "Rix. Rix 47 of the 7th breeding cluster." "That's a mouthful." "Rix works better." She pointed at the exposed piping. "Rix, you see that junction there? The one that's turned sort of blue-green?" I nodded. "In about 2 minutes, that's going to rupture. When it does, this entire corridor will fill with coolant vapor at -40 degrees. Most of you will suffer severe tissue damage. Some might die. She pulled out a cutting tool. Now, standard procedure says I should shut down the entire coolant system, depressurize this section, evacuate all personnel, wait 6 hours for the vapor to dissipate, then make repairs in full hazard gear. The cutting tool whined to life. But standard procedure was written by people who have never had to fix something while it's actively trying to kill them. She began cutting into the damaged section with smooth, precise movements. Humans don't have that luxury. On Earth, if you wait for perfect conditions, you die. You fix the problem now, with what you have, or it fixes you. This is insane, Prex whispered. This is Tuesday, Emily corrected. She finished one cut, moved to start another. Gorvin, get ready. When I finish this cut, coolant is going to spray everywhere. You'll have maybe 5 seconds to get that valve seated and locked. Miss the timing and we're all taking an involuntary vacation in the medical bay. Gorvin moved into position, his bulk somehow graceful in the cramped space. His hands gripped the valve assembly. Tamora, what did you find in the junction box? A polymer seal is degrading. Tamora reported from somewhere deeper in the access tunnel. The chemical signature suggests it has perhaps 6 hours before complete failure. Which junction? 7, Delta 4. Emily cursed. Something short and sharp that my translator didn't bother rendering. That's the primary circulation controller. If that goes, we lose environmental control for 3 entire sectors. Should we report this through proper channels? I asked. Already did? Submitted the work order 3 weeks ago. Emily's hands never stopped moving. It's sitting in a queue behind 200 other non-urgent repairs. Current estimated repair date is 14 weeks from now. She finished the second cut. Now! She barked. Gorvin moved. The valve groaned, metal screaming against metal. Coolant sprayed in a wide arc, droplets freezing in midair and clattering against the walls like hail. The temperature plummeted so fast I felt my respiratory system seize. 5 seconds. That's what Emily had said. I counted them in my head. 1. Gorvin's muscles bulged, the valve slowly rotating. 2. The spray intensified, a geyser of chemical ice. 3. My vision began to blur from the cold. 4. The valve was almost aligned. 5. It locked into place with a sound like a gunshot. The spray stopped. The sudden silence was deafening. Gorvin stepped back, frost coating his entire upper body. He looked like a statue carved from ice. Nice work, Emily said calmly. She was covered in frozen coolant too, her hair white with it, but her hands were already reaching for another tool. Someone get him a thermal blanket before his core temperature drops too far. Kenna, I need you in access tunnel, 6B. There's a backup valve there, needs to be opened manually now that the primary is sealed. The Threxian cadet scrambled to comply. I found myself standing there, watching Emily work with the kind of controlled chaos that Vrell would have called textbook recklessness. Every decision was calculated, just calculated faster than most beings could process. You're wondering how I do it, Emily said without looking at me. Yes, I admitted. Pattern recognition. I've fixed this kind of leak 40 times. I know what works and what doesn't. I know how long each step takes. I know what the danger signs look like. She sealed another junction, tested it with a quick pressure check. Vrell called it intuition earlier, like it's some mystical thing. It's not. It's experience compressed into split-second processing. But you're risking your life, I said. All our lives. No. Emily finally looked up. Her eyes were intense, focused. I'm making calculated decisions about acceptable risk levels. There's a difference. If I thought there was a real chance of catastrophic failure, I wouldn't be here. I'd have evacuated the sector and gone with the 6-hour procedure. How do you know the difference? She smiled then, tired but genuine. Because I grew up on a planet where making the wrong call meant You didn't grow up at all. You learn fast. Or you learn dead. Most humans prefer the first option. Tamara emerged from the access tunnel, her patches pulsing an urgent red. Emily, the polymer seal. It is degrading faster than I initially assessed. Perhaps 2 hours remaining. Of course it is. Emily checked her pad, ran some quick calculations. All right, change of plans. Rix, you're with me. We're going to replace that seal now. Everyone else, finish securing this section, then get back to your quarters and warm up. I don't want anyone's biology getting too stressed. We should help with the seal replacement, Gorvin protested. Can't? Access tunnel is too small for your species. Barely fits humans and Rix's people. She was already moving, tools in hand. But I appreciate the offer. Shows you're learning. The access tunnel was indeed cramped. I had to fold my limbs in ways that would have been uncomfortable for longer than a few minutes. Emily moved through the tight space like water, completely at ease. Your commander was right about one thing, she said, as we navigated toward 7 Delta 4. Humans are reckless by galactic standards. We take risks other species won't. But you said it was calculated. It is. But our calculations accept higher risk tolerances. She squeezed through a particularly narrow section. See, here's what Vrell doesn't understand. It's not that humans don't value our lives. We do. But we also understand that sometimes the only way to preserve life is to risk it. We reached the junction box. The polymer seal was visibly deteriorating, edges crumbling like ancient paper. On Earth, our ancestors didn't have the luxury of perfect safety, Emily continued, opening her toolkit. Every single thing they did carried risk. Hunting carried risk. Gathering food carried risk. Building shelter carried risk. Even sleeping carried risk. She began carefully removing the damaged seal. So, they learned to assess threats quickly and act decisively. The ones who hesitated, who waited for perfect conditions, who refused to take calculated risks, they died out. What you see, when you look at humans, isn't recklessness. It's the end result of millions of years of evolutionary pressure selecting for controlled risk-taking. The damaged seal came free. Emily immediately started installing the replacement, her fingers moving with practiced precision in the tight space. But it costs you, I said. Your casualty rates are real. They are. She didn't try to deny it. We lose people. We lose them doing jobs that need doing, taking risks that need taking. And yeah, sometimes we lose them doing stupid things that didn't need to happen at all. We're not perfect. We're not somehow superior. The new seal clicked into place. She tested it, checked the pressure readings, nodded in satisfaction. But we're still here, Rix. That's the thing Vrell can't wrap his head around. By his logic, by his understanding of proper procedure and acceptable risk, humanity should have killed itself off long before we ever reached space. The fact that we didn't, the fact that we're not only surviving but thriving, that suggests maybe, just maybe, there's more than one right way to solve problems. We started back through the access tunnel. Behind us, I heard the junction box hum back to life, systems stabilizing. You embarrassed him, I said. Vrell, in front of his entire class. Emily was quiet for a moment. Yeah, I did. That wasn't entirely professional of me. But he was wrong. He was wrong about some things, right about others. Humans are dangerous to work with sometimes. We do make decisions that seem insane to other species. And yes, we die more often than most. She emerged from the tunnel, stood up, stretched. But context matters. Purpose matters. Understanding why someone does something is just as important as understanding what they did. The other cadets were waiting when we returned to the main corridor. The temperature had stabilized. The crisis was over. 32 minutes, Kenna announced, from identification of the problem to complete resolution. Not bad, Emily agreed. She looked around at all of us, at the frost-covered cadets who had followed a maintenance technician into a disaster zone. "You all did good work today. Better than good. You saw a problem, you adapted to circumstances, you used your individual strengths to complement each other's weaknesses. That's the secret nobody tells you in all those tactical courses." She started gathering her tools. War isn't won by perfect soldiers following perfect procedures. It's won by imperfect people making the best decisions they can with incomplete information under terrible conditions. Every species brings something different to that equation. Humans bring the ability to make fast decisions under pressure. But we need Threxians to navigate through chaos. We need Selenites to read situations we might miss. We need Keltharians to provide raw strength when finesse fails. Emily closed her toolkit with a decisive snap. Commander Vrell thinks human methods are wrong because they don't match his methods. But there is no one right way to survive. There's only what works. She looked each of us in the eye. And speaking from experience, the people who survive the longest are the ones who learn from everyone, not just their own kind. She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Rix? When you write your report on today's field experience, and I know you will, because that's what good cadets do, maybe mention that the reckless human managed to teach you something valuable. Might help balance out Vrell's lecture." "What if he asks what you taught us?" I asked. Emily smiled. "Tell him you learned that survival isn't about never taking risks. It's about knowing which risks are worth taking." She walked away down the corridor, toolkit slung over one shoulder, just another technician finishing another job on another day. We stood there in silence. 15 cadets who had come to watch a lecture about human weakness and ended up learning about human strength instead. "I need to apologize," Gorvin said suddenly, his voice gravelly. I laughed. "Earlier, when Vrell mocked the human approach, I thought it was foolish." "We all did," Tamora agreed, her patches shifting to an embarrassed purple. "I have worked on ships for 3 cycles," Prex added quietly. "I have seen humans do things I considered impossible. I dismissed them as lucky. But luck does not explain today. Luck does not explain 32 minutes. I thought about Emily's words, about pattern recognition and evolutionary pressure, about calculated risks and acceptable tolerances, about the difference between recklessness and decisiveness. "We should return to the lecture hall," I said finally. "If Vrell has not dismissed entirely, we owe him the courtesy of explaining our absence." The others agreed. We made our way back through the warming corridors, past stabilizing environmental controls, toward a conversation that would be difficult but necessary. Vrell was still there. He stood on his platform, alone now, looking somehow smaller than before. "Commander," Tamora spoke first, her voice gentle, "we must apologize for our unauthorized departure." Vrell's mandibles twitched. "You acted on instinct, a very human trait." "No, sir," I heard myself say. "We acted on evidence. Technician Martinez identified a clear and present danger. She organized a response. We chose to participate." 15 cadets, from different worlds, different physiologies, different training backgrounds. In what? 30 seconds? Less, Kenna confirmed. She assessed each of our capabilities and assigned appropriate tasks within 20 seconds of accepting our assistance. Vrell was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, quieter, missing the certainty it had carried during his lecture. "I spent 40 years in military service," he said. "I have commanded hundreds of beings, trained thousands, and I have never, not once, assembled a multi-species team that quickly or effectively. Tell me what you learned today, cadets, and I do not mean technical skills." We took turns sharing observations, the way Emily had used each species' natural advantages, how she communicated clearly without unnecessary explanation, the way she balanced speed with safety, urgency with precision. how she trusted us to do our jobs without micromanaging. She was in command, Gorvin said. Without holding rank, without needing to assert authority, we simply followed. Vrell's skin had shifted to a contemplative gray. Natural leadership, the kind that cannot be taught through standard curriculum. She said something else. I added. She said humans learn from everyone, not just their own kind. That survival means taking the best from every source. And what do you believe I should learn from this, Cadet Rix? The question hung in the air. Behind Vrell, the hollow display still showed Earth, spinning silently. Permission to speak freely, sir? Granted. I think, I said carefully, that you know exactly what to learn. You called us here to teach about human failures. Instead, we witnessed human success, not despite their methods, but because of them. The question is whether you, are willing to acknowledge that our way is not the only way. Vrell stood motionless. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached up and deactivated the hollow display. Class dismissed, he said quietly. Your next assignment is to write a comparative analysis of multiple tactical approaches to crisis situations. I want examples from at least 3 different species methodologies, including human. We filed out slowly. At the door, I heard Vrell call out one more time. Cadet Rix. I turned. Thank you, he said simply. Outside, station life continued as normal. Beings moved through corridors, ships docked and departed, the machine of galactic civilization, turning as it always had. But something had shifted. In 15 cadets, from a dozen worlds, in one proud commander, in the small space between certainty and understanding. The next day, I saw Emily Martinez in the station commissary. She was sitting alone, reading something on her data pad, drinking what I had learned was called coffee. I approached her table. Technician Martinez, may I join you? She looked up, surprised. Sure, call me Emily. I sat, folding my limbs carefully. I wanted to thank you for yesterday. You guys did all the work. I just pointed you in the right direction. You did more than that. You showed us a different perspective. Emily smiled. That's what humans do best, I think. We've been outsiders in galactic civilization since first contact. We see things differently because we have to. It's not better or worse, just different. Vrell asked us to write about human tactical approaches, I said. I was hoping you might be willing to share more examples. For academic purposes. Academic purposes, she repeated with a grin. Sure. I've got some stories. Most of them, even true. She took a sip of her coffee. But fair warning, Rix. Once you start seeing how humans think, you can't unsee it. Might change how you approach your own training. I believe that is the point. We talked for over an hour. She told me about human military history, about tactics born from desperation and refined through necessity, about the way her species approached problems from angles others never considered. Over the following weeks, I found myself seeking her out more often. Other cadets did the same. Slowly, quietly, Emily Martinez became an unofficial instructor to a group of officer candidates who had been taught that humans had nothing to teach. 3 months later, when Vrell announced he was restructuring his tactical curriculum to include multi-species approach comparison, nobody was surprised. When he specifically requested that certain human personnel be allowed to guest lecture, several cadets exchanged knowing looks. And when Emily Martinez stood on that same platform where Vrell had once mocked her species, addressing a hall full of cadets, who now understood that strength comes in many forms, I felt something strange and unexpected. Pride. Not in my own species, not even in Emily specifically, but in what we had all learned together. That the galaxy is vast, species are different, and survival belongs not to those who believe they have all the answers, but to those willing to learn from everyone, even the reckless humans from their impossible Deathworld. Especially them.